Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. I thought I was being smart when I decided to give online dating another shot. After a few months of swiping left and right, I matched with a guy named Ryan. His profile was intriguing, filled with pictures of him hiking in the mountains, cooking elaborate meals, and even volunteering at a local shelter. He had a genuine smile that seemed to pull me in, and I couldn't help but feel a little flutter of excitement. Maybe this time would be different. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. Ryan shared stories about his adventures, and I found myself laughing more than I had in a while. There was something about him that felt safe, comfortable. He was charming, intelligent, and made me forget about the awkward dates I'd been on before. After a week of back-and-forth messages, we decided to meet up in person. We agreed to meet at this quaint little cafe tucked away in one of the quieter parts of town. It had a vintage vibe, with exposed brick walls and soft lighting that made everything feel warm and inviting. The day arrived, and I dressed with care, wanting to make a good impression. I arrived early, my heart pounding with anticipation. The cafe was cozy, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. I found a corner table where I could see the entrance. As I sat there, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and nerves. Would he be as charming in person? Would we have that same spark? After a few minutes, I spotted him walking in. He looked just like his pictures, tall with messy dark hair and a warm smile. I waved, and he came over, a little shy but radiating an energy that put me at ease. We talked about everything and nothing, laughing over shared interests and swapping stories. The coffee was good, but our conversation was better. I felt like I was floating, lost in this moment where everything felt right. As the afternoon wore on, Ryan suggested we take a walk to a nearby park. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the landscape. I agreed, eager to prolong our time together. The park was beautiful, with tall trees lining the paths and the distant sound of children playing. We walked side by side, our conversation becoming more personal, more intimate. I shared my dreams with him, and he opened up about his past, revealing bits of vulnerability that only made me like him more. But as we continued walking, I noticed a shift in his demeanor. His laughter grew quieter, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made me feel uneasy. I brushed it off, telling myself that everyone has their off moments, and tried to refocus on the pleasant evening. We stopped by a small pond, the water reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Ryan leaned against a tree, looking thoughtful, and I felt a strange urge to reach out and comfort him. Then, without warning, he asked me if I believed in fate. I laughed it off, but his expression remained serious. He told me he believed that some people were meant to cross paths, that there was a reason we met. It felt heavy, like he was trying to convey something deeper, and I didn't know how to respond. I could feel the air around us thickening, and I suddenly wished we were back at the cafe, surrounded by laughter and light. As we continued our walk, I noticed Ryan's eyes scanning the area, his body language shifting. He seemed on edge, like he was looking for something or someone. I tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort that crept in, but it clung to me like a shadow. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves and the whisper of the wind, and suddenly, the park felt less inviting and more like a stage for something sinister. I suggested we head back, feeling the urge to escape the oppressive energy. But Ryan insisted on taking a different path, one that led deeper into the woods. I hesitated, feeling the urge to turn back, but I didn't want to seem rude or overly cautious. So I followed him, my heart racing as the trees grew denser, blocking out the fading light. The atmosphere shifted drastically, and the laughter we shared earlier faded into the background. The air felt heavy, and I could hear the crunch of twigs underfoot, the sounds of the forest becoming almost deafening in their silence. Ryan walked ahead, and I trailed behind, feeling an unease settle in my stomach. I glanced around, noticing how the shadows seemed to stretch longer, twisting into grotesque shapes. Then, without warning, Ryan stopped and turned to face me, his expression unreadable. He reached into his pocket, and for a moment, my heart dropped. I thought he was going to pull out a weapon or something equally horrifying. Instead, he revealed a small, ornate compass. It gleamed in the dim light as he held it up, a strange glint in his eyes. He explained how he had found it while hiking years ago, claiming it had a mind of its own, guiding him to places he was meant to be. I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood, but it felt hollow. I could feel the tension rising, a palpable fear pressing against my chest. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led into a trap. Ryan stepped closer, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I could see the flicker of something dark behind his charming facade. He started talking about destiny again, about how sometimes you have to follow the signs, no matter how unsettling they may seem. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I stood frozen, battling the urge to flee. Suddenly, he turned the compass in his hand, and I felt a surge of panic wash over me. The needle spun wildly before settling, pointing directly at me. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what was happening. The woods around us seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker, more menacing. There was a sinister energy in the air, and I could feel my heart racing as adrenaline kicked in. In that moment, everything changed. The charming guy I had met at the cafe was gone, replaced by someone who was almost unrecognizable. His eyes bore into me, and I could see a flicker of madness beneath the surface. I realized that this was no ordinary date. This was a game to him, a twisted version of fate that I had unwittingly walked into. I turned to run, but he grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. Panic surged through me as I fought against him, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I struggled free and bolted down the path, branches scratching at my arms as I pushed through the underbrush. I could hear him calling after me, the calmness in his voice sending chills down my spine. I burst into a clearing, desperate to find my way back. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't dare stop to check it. I needed to get away, to put as much distance between us as possible. I could hear Ryan's footsteps behind me, the sound growing fainter as I sprinted toward the edge of the park. Finally, I emerged from the trees and stumbled into the parking lot, gasping for breath. I glanced back, half expecting to see him right behind me, but he was gone. The sudden silence was deafening, and the weight of what just happened crashed over me. I fumbled for my phone, finally checking the time. It was then that I noticed the notifications. Multiple messages from Ryan filled my screen, each one more frantic than the last. My heart dropped as I read them. He had been trying to reach me all day, sending me text after text about how he had something important to show me, that the compass was meant to lead us somewhere special. But the last message sent chills down my spine. I told you we were meant to be. You just have to trust me. In that moment, I realized the twist of fate wasn't mine to control. The compass wasn't just a tool for him. It was a way to draw me into his web. I felt the weight of the evening settle around me, the horrors of what could have happened replaying in my mind. I drove home, the night stretching out before me, leaving behind the park and the dark path I had barely escaped. The thing about online dating is that you never really know who you're talking to until you meet face to face. I had my fair share of awkward encounters, but the one with Jake was something I'd never forget. It started like most of my swipes, nothing too flashy, just a guy with a decent smile and some vague interests that matched mine. We chatted for a couple of weeks, and I felt a connection, or at least what I thought was one. I was ready to take it to the next level, and when he suggested we meet at this old, supposedly haunted cafe on the outskirts of town, I was intrigued. The place was called the Hollow Nook, and it definitely had a vibe. It was a crumbling Victorian house turned coffee shop, with creaky floorboards and walls covered in peeling paint. The moment I stepped inside, a chill ran through me. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something I couldn't quite place, maybe despair. The dim lighting only added to the atmosphere, making everything feel like it was stuck in a different time. I could hear the faint sound of classical music playing in the background, giving it an eerie edge. I arrived early, trying to calm my nerves by observing the odd assortment of patrons. There were a couple of artists in the corner, sketching furiously, and an elderly man who seemed lost in his own world, staring blankly at the wall. I took a seat near the window and fidgeted with my phone, waiting for Jake to arrive. As the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced around, but everyone seemed engrossed in their own little bubble. Shaking off the sensation, I focused on the clock, counting down the seconds until he'd finally show up. When Jake walked in, he looked exactly like his pictures, tall, dark hair, and a charming smile that made my heart skip. He waved, and I felt a rush of excitement. But as he approached, I noticed something unsettling in his eyes. It was hard to pinpoint, but they seemed almost too intense, as if he were studying me rather than just being friendly. I brushed it off, attributing it to nerves. Maybe he was just as anxious as I was. We settled into conversation, and at first, it flowed easily. He was funny and engaging, sharing stories about his life and asking about mine. But as the conversation deepened, I felt a shift. His questions became more probing, almost invasive. He asked about my family, my childhood, and my fears. I tried to keep it light, sharing a few anecdotes, but he seemed fixated on the darker parts of my life. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude, so I went along with it. As the cafe grew busier, the atmosphere shifted. The music faded into the background, replaced by the muffled sounds of chatter and clinking cups. I could feel the energy in the room change, a collective tension building like the calm before a storm. I glanced at the clock again. Over an hour had passed since we'd met. I wondered if I should suggest we wrap things up, but Jake's gaze held me captive. At one point, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He told me about the history of the Hollow Nook, how it was rumored to be haunted by the spirits of past patrons who never left. His words dripped with fascination, but I could sense an underlying thrill in his tone, a hint of something darker. I laughed it off, trying to lighten the mood, but he wasn't done. He leaned back, surveying the room, and I caught a glimpse of something in his expression. Was it excitement or something more sinister? The clock struck 8, and I decided it was time to make a move. I excused myself to the bathroom, hoping that stepping away would clear my head. The small room was dimly lit, and as I splashed some water on my face, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror. My heart raced as I thought about how I'd gotten myself into this weird situation. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. When I returned to the main area, the cafe felt different. The patrons had thinned out, and the atmosphere was heavier, almost suffocating. Jake was still at our table, but now he was staring into his cup, a contemplative look on his face. I sat down, and he immediately started talking again, this time about his hobbies. It was like a switch flipped. He was no longer charming but rather intense and almost obsessive. He spoke about collecting old artifacts, things that belonged to people who had died under mysterious circumstances. As he described some of his prized possessions, I felt my stomach drop. There was something unsettling about the way he spoke, like he relished the idea of death. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but he wouldn't have it. His voice took on a darker tone as he shared a story about a woman who had visited the Hollow Nook years ago, never to be seen again. The way he recounted it sent chills down my spine. I could see the excitement in his eyes, a glimmer of something that made my skin crawl. I knew I had to leave. I glanced around the cafe. The few remaining patrons were now just shadows in the dim light, their faces obscured. Why did it feel like the walls were closing in? I excused myself again, this time claiming I had a prior commitment. Jake's smile faltered, but he didn't push back. Instead, he just nodded, his eyes boring into me like he wanted to memorize every detail of my face. As I made my way toward the exit, the door creaked ominously, and I felt a rush of cold air sweep past me. The street outside was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. I hurried to my car, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see Jake following me. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot, eager to put some distance between myself and the Hollow Nook. The next day, I couldn't shake the encounter from my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just nerves, that I had overreacted, but something gnawed at me. As I scrolled through my phone, I noticed a message from Jake. Had a great time last night. Let's meet again. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Just then, my phone buzzed again, another message from him. I have something special to show you. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly blocked his number, feeling a mix of relief and dread. I told myself I was done with online dating. I needed a break, some space to clear my head. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard my phone buzz again. Curious yet wary, I glanced over. It was a notification from a dating app. Someone had messaged me. I opened it, only to find a familiar name staring back at me, Jake. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read his message. You didn't think I'd let you go that easily, did you? In that moment, I realized the truth. The feeling of being watched, the intensity in his eyes, the stories of the cafe. I wasn't just dealing with a bad date. I had stumbled into something far more sinister. My heart raced as I understood that I wasn't the one who had been swiping right. I was the prey, and Jake was ready to seal the deal. I had just moved to a new city, and like anyone else trying to make friends, I thought I'd give the whole dating app thing a shot. I was scrolling through Hinge on a quiet Friday night, half eating a tub of ice cream, when I came across her profile. Her name was Lily, and she had this captivating smile. It wasn't just a smile, though. It was the way her profile hinted at adventure, hiking trails, spontaneous road trips, and a penchant for horror movies. I was intrigued. We matched, and soon enough, our messages turned into late-night conversations, filled with laughter and shared interests. She lived in a small apartment downtown, a cozy little place that she described as her sanctuary. As the days passed, I felt a pull toward her that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the chemistry. It was something deeper that felt almost magnetic. I decided it was time to meet in person. We set the date for a Saturday night, and I spent the whole day preparing. I wanted everything to be perfect. I chose a trendy little cafe that was known for its spooky theme, dark walls, flickering candles, and eerie soundtracks playing softly in the background. It felt like the perfect blend of cozy and creepy, just like the vibe we had built up over our chats. As I arrived at the cafe, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The atmosphere was charged, with a sense of anticipation hanging in the air. I spotted Lily sitting at a corner table, her dark hair framing her face, and my heart raced. She looked even better in person. We hugged, and there was that instant connection that made me feel like I had known her forever. We talked about everything, our favorite horror movies, childhood memories, and even our dreams. But then, as the night wore on, I began to sense something off. It was subtle at first, an undercurrent in her laughter that felt a little too sharp. She spoke with passion about her love for horror, but there was something in her eyes that flickered when she mentioned the darker themes. I brushed it off. Maybe she was just really into it, I thought. We finished our drinks and decided to take a walk through the nearby park, where the trees loomed like dark sentinels under the glow of the streetlights. As we strolled, she began to tell me a story about her childhood, a story about a haunted house that her friends dared her to enter. She described the creaky floorboards and the smell of mildew as if she'd been there just yesterday. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, but there was a weight to her words, a seriousness that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just recounting a spooky tale. She was reliving it. We reached a secluded part of the park, where the trees formed a natural archway, casting eerie shadows on the ground. It felt like we had stepped into another world. She suddenly stopped and turned to me, her expression serious. She spoke about the thrill of fear, how it made her feel alive. I nodded, trying to match her intensity, but I felt a creeping sense of dread settle in my stomach. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. She told me about a game she liked to play, a sort of psychological experiment where she would immerse herself in the fear of the unknown. She described it like a dance with darkness, and I found myself both fascinated and terrified. I asked her what the rules were, half expecting a playful answer, but her gaze turned cold. "You just have to trust me," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. Before I could respond, she took my hand and led me deeper into the park, away from the path. The trees closed in around us, and the darkness felt thicker. My heart raced. and I felt a mix of thrill and apprehension. We arrived at an old gazebo, long abandoned and covered in vines. It seemed out of place, as if it had been forgotten by time. "Let's play here," she said, her voice taking on an unsettling calm. I hesitated, but something in her demeanor made it hard to refuse. She pulled out her phone and turned on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. I followed her inside the gazebo, feeling the hairs on my neck stand up. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of damp wood and rust. She started telling stories about the gazebo, weaving tales of lovers who had met there, of curses and whispers of the past. The way she spoke sent chills down my spine, and I found myself drawn in, unable to look away. But then everything shifted. The light flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw shadows moving just outside the beam. I glanced toward the entrance, heart pounding, but Lily seemed completely unfazed. "It's part of the game," she said, her tone almost playful. "You have to embrace the fear." Just then, I heard a rustling noise outside. It was faint, but it sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. I turned to Lily, but her eyes were wide, almost manic. "Listen," she said. "Do you hear that?" My pulse quickened as I strained to hear. The rustling grew louder, and I felt trapped inside the gazebo, like the walls were closing in around me. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The shadows seemed to grow, creeping closer. I could barely breathe. A primal instinct urged me to run. But Lily was still standing there, a wild look in her eyes, as if she were waiting for something to happen. Then, without warning, the flashlight went out completely. Darkness enveloped us, and I felt the weight of the world pressing down. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, my only source of light. I turned it on and illuminated the gazebo, but Lily was gone. I called out her name, but only silence answered. I stumbled out of the gazebo, heart racing, desperately scanning the area around me. The park felt different now, twisted and menacing. That's when I noticed the shadows again, shifting in the darkness. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but I couldn't leave her behind. I called for her again, my voice echoing in the silence. And then I saw her, standing under a tree, silhouetted against the moonlight. She wasn't alone. A figure stood beside her, indistinct and shrouded in darkness. I felt a jolt of fear. It was as if they were waiting for me, drawing me into their web. My mind raced. I had to get out, but as I turned to run, I felt a pull, as if something was holding me back. I stumbled, trying to break free from whatever unseen force gripped me. Just then, I heard Lily's voice, sweet yet chilling. "You have to trust me." I turned back, and in that moment, everything snapped into focus. The figure beside her took a step forward, and it was then I realized their face was an uncanny mirror of my own. The shock froze me in place. "Welcome to the game," Lily said, her smile wide and sinister. The recognition washed over me like ice water. She hadn't been trying to scare me. She was drawing me into a twisted reflection of myself, a psychological trap I had never seen coming. As the shadows closed in, I understood too late that I was never meant to escape. I was scrolling through my dating app, swiping left and right like it was some mindless game, until I stumbled upon a profile that caught my eye. His name was Alex, and he was unlike anyone I had seen before. There was something about his smile that felt genuine, almost inviting. Maybe it was the way his brown eyes seemed to sparkle in the dim light of his profile picture. Or perhaps it was the fact that he wasn't just another cookie-cutter handsome face, but had an edge that hinted at a deeper personality. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen, then swiped right. The chat started off casually, filled with the usual small talk. We talked about our favorite movies, shared awkward dating stories, and even bonded over our mutual dislike of pineapple on pizza. I felt a connection that was rare in the world of online dating, a spark that made me curious to know more about him. As the days passed, our conversations grew deeper, more personal. He told me about his love for photography, capturing the beauty in the ordinary. I shared my dreams of traveling the world, experiencing everything life had to offer. Eventually, Alex invited me to meet up. He suggested a quaint little coffee shop tucked away in the heart of the city, a place he claimed had the best espresso. I was thrilled. My stomach fluttered with excitement as I got ready that day. I wore my favorite dress, the one I thought would make me look cute, but not too over the top. I spent extra time on my hair, hoping to impress him without seeming like I was trying too hard. When I arrived at the coffee shop, my heart raced. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and I could see people chatting and laughing, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead lights. I spotted Alex sitting at a corner table, his camera resting beside him like an old friend. He looked just as charming in person, and I felt a rush of relief as I approached him. The conversation flowed naturally, just like it did online. We laughed, shared stories, and lost track of time. I felt a warmth radiating from him, an intensity that made me feel drawn to him. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. His demeanor changed slightly, a flicker of something darker crossing his face when he spoke about his family. He mentioned a history of mental illness, but he brushed it off with a light-hearted joke, and I wanted to believe him. As we left the coffee shop, he suggested we take a walk through the nearby park. It was a beautiful evening, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, and I couldn't resist. The park was eerily quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of laughter from a playground. We walked side by side, and I felt the tension in the air shift again. Alex began to talk about his love for the dark and mysterious. He mentioned how beauty often hides in shadows, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. As we wandered deeper into the park, the trees grew thicker, and the path became less defined. My heart raced, and I felt an instinctual urge to turn back, but I didn't want to seem rude. After all, we were just two people getting to know each other, right? Suddenly, Alex stopped and turned to me, his expression serious. He told me he wanted to show me something special. My heart pounded, a mix of curiosity and unease. He led me to an old, dilapidated gazebo at the center of the park, hidden by overgrown vines. The structure looked like it had been abandoned for years, the wood weathered and cracked. I hesitated at the entrance, but he urged me inside. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. As I stepped inside, I felt a rush of unease. The shadows seemed to close in around us. Alex pulled out his camera and began snapping photos, capturing the haunting beauty of the gazebo. I watched him, trying to shake off the discomfort that had settled in my gut. He seemed so focused, so enthralled by the darkness surrounding us. I forced myself to smile, to play along, but inside I felt a growing sense of dread. Then, without warning, he turned to me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He spoke about how the world was full of darkness, how people often hid their true selves behind masks of normalcy. His words sent shivers down my spine. I could sense he was revealing a truth about himself, something buried deep within. I took a step back, my heart racing. The playful banter had morphed into something unsettling. I didn't know how to respond to his sudden shift. I wanted to leave, but something held me in place, like I was caught in his web. He reached out, brushing his fingers against my arm as he leaned closer. I could feel his breath on my face, his eyes boring into mine. I was frozen, a mix of fear and fascination coursing through me. Just then, a noise broke the tension, a rustling in the bushes nearby. We both turned to look, and in that moment, I felt the fear seep into my bones. Alex's expression shifted again, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. He turned back to me, his smile returning, but not quite reaching his eyes. He asked if I was scared, and I wanted to say no, to laugh it off, but the unease wouldn't let me. I excused myself, saying I needed to get home. I could feel the weight of his gaze as I walked away, a sense of urgency pushing me forward. As I hurried down the path, I heard him call after me, his voice low and almost sinister. "You shouldn't run away from the dark." That phrase echoed in my mind as I reached my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with my keys. I was desperate to get away from the park from him. I drove home, the streets blurring past me, my heart still racing. Once I was safely inside my apartment, I thought about blocking him, deleting the app, and pretending this night never happened. But curiosity gnawed at me. What was it about him that kept me intrigued? I pulled out my phone and opened the app, only to find my heart drop into my stomach. His profile was gone. No trace of him remained. I shook my head, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he deleted his account, or maybe it was a glitch. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The darkness he spoke of lingered in my mind, wrapping around my thoughts like a suffocating blanket. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. As I strolled through the park, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. I reached the gazebo, and my heart sank. It was there, looming in the sunlight, a stark reminder of last night. I stepped inside, the air heavy with an unsettling stillness. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on the ground, a small, worn-out camera lens. It looked familiar. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. My breath caught. It was the same lens he had used to take pictures last night. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I needed to get out of there. I rushed back to my car, my instinct screaming at me to leave. Just as I reached the parking lot, I heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't run away from the dark." My heart dropped. I turned slowly, and there he was, Alex, standing under a tree, his smile wide, eyes glinting with a strange mix of affection and something darker. He stepped forward, and I froze, realizing with a sickening feeling that he had followed me. All those conversations, the connection we shared, had been a prelude to something sinister. I was no longer just a girl on a date. I was a character in his twisted narrative, and he was the author, controlling the plot. In that moment, I understood that I had stumbled into a horror story of my own, one where the darkness wasn't just a metaphor but a living, breathing entity. And I was right in the thick of it. I had always thought of myself as a pretty savvy person when it came to dating apps. You know the drill. Swipe left, swipe right, a little banter, and if you're lucky, you might just find someone worth your time. But when I stumbled upon Hinge, it felt different. It was less about the superficial and more about connecting on a deeper level. At least, that's what the ads promised. Little did I know, this would spiral into an experience that would haunt me. I remember scrolling through profiles late one night, the glow of my phone illuminating the dark corners of my room. I was half-heartedly swiping, looking for something interesting. Then I saw his profile. His name was Jake, and he had this charming smile that felt genuine. His prompts were intriguing, revealing a mix of humor and depth. I found myself captivated, and before I knew it, I had sent him a message. The conversation flowed easily. We shared our favorite horror movies, discussed our mutual love for hiking, and even swapped stories about our childhoods. As the night wore on, I felt a connection that was rare for me, something more than just idle chit-chat. Jake suggested we meet up for coffee at a quaint little cafe downtown. I agreed, my heart racing with anticipation. The thrill of meeting someone new, combined with the rush of potential romance, was intoxicating. The day of our date arrived, and I dressed carefully, wanting to impress but also feeling the weight of nervous energy. The cafe was cozy, filled with the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and the gentle buzz of conversation. I found a table by the window, my eyes scanning the room for Jake. Time ticked slowly, and I felt my excitement wane as minutes turned into half an hour. Just as I was about to give up and leave, the door swung open, and there he was. Jake looked even better in person. He had this easy confidence about him, and when he approached my table, I felt a flutter in my stomach. We chatted easily, the conversation flowing as smoothly as the coffee. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Something felt off, like an itch I couldn't scratch. We finished our coffees, and he suggested we go for a walk in the nearby park. As we strolled, I noticed the way he would glance at me, his expression sometimes shifting from charming to something more intense. I brushed it off as nerves, convincing myself that it was just the excitement of a new connection. But then he suggested we head back to his apartment, and that's when the unease settled in. His place was an old building on the edge of the city, its peeling paint and creaky staircase giving it a character that felt almost eerie. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit with a wave of dread, but I couldn't pinpoint why. Jake offered me a drink, and I accepted, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. We sat on his worn-out couch, and the conversation continued, but I could feel a shift in the atmosphere. There was a chill in the air, and I noticed odd decorations scattered around his living room, strange masks, old photographs of people I didn't recognize, and a collection of vintage horror memorabilia. It was like stepping into a museum of the macabre. I forced a smile, trying to engage with him, but the more I looked around, the more uneasy I felt. Jake seemed to pick up on my discomfort. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper as he recounted a story about a ghost he believed haunted the building. I laughed nervously, but he continued, his eyes darkening with intensity. The way he spoke sent shivers down my spine. It was as if he was drawing me into a world where reality blurred with the supernatural. I needed to leave. The urge to escape was overwhelming, but I didn't want to be rude. I feigned a yawn, suggesting that I should head home, since it was getting late. Jake didn't take it well. His expression shifted dramatically, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of something unsettling beneath his charming facade. It was like a mask slipping, revealing a darker side I hadn't anticipated. He insisted I stay a bit longer, but the warmth in his voice felt strangely forced. I stood up, my heart pounding as I made my way to the door. That's when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. It was dark, and I felt an inexplicable urge to peek inside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I hesitated, torn between the desire to know and the instinct to flee. Jake was watching me, his gaze intense. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I made a decision, turning to him with a forced smile, trying to mask the rising panic. But before I could make it to the door, he stepped closer, blocking my path. The way he looked at me made everything inside me scream to run. I managed to slip past him, my heart racing as I reached for the door handle. The moment I opened it, a rush of cold air hit me, and I was met with a small, dimly lit room. It was filled with old furniture, but what caught my eye was a large mirror standing against the wall. My reflection stared back at me, but something was off. My image flickered, almost like a glitch, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Suddenly, Jake was behind me, his presence looming. Panic surged through me, and I turned to face him, ready to bolt. But instead of anger, I saw a twisted expression of fascination on his face. He wasn't just interested in me. He was obsessed with the idea of capturing something beyond this world. That's when it clicked. The stories he told, the decorations, it all connected. He believed he could harness the energy of the supernatural, and I was just another pawn in his game. My heart raced as I realized I was in over my head. I needed to escape, but the door was now shut, and Jake stood between me and freedom. I backed away slowly, my mind racing for an escape plan. In a moment of desperation, I lunged toward the window, but it was locked tight. I turned around to find Jake standing there, his expression unsettlingly calm. It was as if he relished my fear. I glanced around the room, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. The mirror caught my eye again, and I instinctively moved toward it. In that moment, I remembered something I had read about mirrors and their connection to the supernatural. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. I focused on my reflection, willing it to show me the truth. To my shock, the mirror began to ripple, the surface distorting like a pool of water. I could see glimpses of otherworldly figures lurking behind me, their eyes wide with longing. Jake took a step closer, and as he reached out, I felt a surge of energy radiating from the mirror. It was as if the spirits trapped within were responding to my fear, and I had inadvertently summoned them. The room filled with an eerie chill, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching us both. In that moment, I understood that Jake wasn't just a man. He was a conduit, a gateway to something much darker. My instincts kicked in, and I shouted, directing my energy toward the mirror, willing it to break free from his grasp. The glass shattered, and with it, the hold he had over me. Suddenly, the room erupted in chaos. The otherworldly figures poured forth from the mirror, swirling around Jake, their whispers growing louder. He looked terrified, the facade of confidence crumbling as he realized he had unleashed something beyond his control. I seized the opportunity, pushing past him and bolting for the door. As I burst outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, heart racing and breathless. Looking back at the building, I could see shadows moving behind the windows, the remnants of Jake's obsession trapped within. I had escaped, but the memory of that night would forever haunt me, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk beneath the surface of modern dating. I drove away, the city lights blurring into streaks of color, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. I didn't know what had happened to Jake or the spirits he had tried to control, but one thing was clear. Not every connection is meant to be made, and sometimes it's better to listen to that gut feeling before it's too late. I had always been a bit of a skeptic when it came to online dating. I mean, why would I put my trust in a bunch of strangers lurking behind screens? But after the breakup with Jenna, I found myself scrolling through my phone late at night, aimlessly swiping on Hinge. The glow of the screen felt like a warm blanket in the cold isolation of my apartment. It was a Friday night, and while my friends were out, I was home nursing a pint of ice cream and scrolling through profiles. That's when I stumbled across a girl named Lucy. Her profile was simple but intriguing. She had long dark hair that framed her face, and her smile seemed genuine, almost inviting. Her bio was quirky yet mysterious, leaving just enough to the imagination. I matched with her, and a conversation sparked, flowing easily. She had this way of making me feel like I was the only one in the world, like every word I typed mattered. As the days turned into weeks, we exchanged messages that felt like an unbroken thread. She shared her love for horror movies and hiking, and I told her about my passion for photography. The more we talked, the more I found myself drawn to her. It was exhilarating, the way she kept me guessing, but as I began to fall for her, a nagging feeling twisted in my stomach. It was the little things. She was always busy during weekends and avoided sharing too many details about her life. But I brushed it off, chalking it up to her keeping some mystery alive. Finally, after weeks of virtual flirtation, Lucy suggested we meet. I couldn't believe it. We settled on a small, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of the city. Nestled between a bookshop and a vintage clothing store, the place had an ambience that felt right for a first date. As I entered, a small bell jingled above the door, and the comforting aroma of coffee enveloped me. I spotted her sitting in a corner booth, nervously twirling a strand of hair around her finger. She looked just like her pictures, but in person, there was something more electric about her presence. The conversation flowed, and laughter bubbled between us like a fizzy drink. But there was an undercurrent, a strange tension that I couldn't shake off. It was the way she glanced at the door every few minutes, or how her smile faltered whenever someone walked in. I tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing on the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her favorite horror films. As the night wore on, she suggested we take a walk. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the empty streets. We wandered through a nearby park, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to close in on us. The shadows danced around us, and the wind whispered secrets I couldn't quite grasp. She suddenly stopped, her expression shifting from playful to serious. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced as I prepared myself for something dramatic. "I've had a tough time with relationships," she said, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I've been through things that make me different." I wanted to ask her more, to pry open the door to her secrets, but the moment was interrupted by the sound of rustling leaves. We both turned, and I could see the anxiety creeping back into her features. "There's been someone watching me," she said suddenly, her eyes wide with fear. "I know it sounds crazy, but ever since I started dating again, I feel like I'm being followed." My heart sank. I wanted to comfort her, but all I could think about was the growing darkness around us. I tried to laugh it off, to lighten the mood, but it felt forced. I could see her distress and felt a knot tighten in my stomach. We continued our walk, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump, and Lucy looked increasingly uneasy. I pulled out my phone to check the time, wanting to suggest we head back, But as I glanced at the screen, I noticed a notification that made my blood run cold. It was a message from Lucy. "Are you still out there?" I turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" She looked at me, her expression shifting to one of fear. "I didn't send that. I didn't type anything." The night felt suffocating, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It was as if the shadows were closing in, and the park that had once felt so inviting now felt like a trap. I suggested we head back to the cafe, my instinct screaming that we needed to get out of there. As we walked, I noticed a figure in the distance, lurking beneath the streetlight. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to discern if it was just my imagination. But no, it was a man. He was staring right at us, his expression hidden in the darkness. Lucy grabbed my arm, her grip tight as she pulled me closer. "We need to go now." We broke into a jog, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the empty streets. I kept glancing back, my mind racing with thoughts. Who was that man? Was he the one she feared? We made it back to the cafe, breathless and shaken. Lucy urged me to stay with her until she called a ride. I sat across from her, trying to calm my racing heart. But just as I was about to ask her more about the man, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from her. "Trust me, I'm not who you think I am." I froze, my blood running cold. I looked up at her, confusion flooding my senses. "What do you mean?" But she simply stared back, her expression unreadable. The cafe felt small, and I could feel the weight of every second dragging on. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the night. Was this all a game? Had I been set up? Before I could voice my thoughts, the door swung open violently. In walked a man from the park, his eyes locking onto Lucy with an intensity that froze me in place. My body went rigid as he approached our table, his face a mask of fury. "You think you can just walk away?" he growled. But before I could react, Lucy's demeanor shifted completely. "Stop it," she said, her voice low and commanding. "I told you to let it go." The man hesitated, confusion flashing across his face. I watched in horror as Lucy stood up, her posture transforming into something fierce. "You don't own me. I'm done playing your games." It was like a switch flipped in my mind. The girl I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted. The air thickened with tension as I realized the truth. Lucy wasn't afraid of him. She was controlling this situation. I stumbled back, feeling like a puppet with its strings cut. Everything I thought I knew unraveled in an instant. The fear I felt was quickly replaced by a chilling sense of betrayal. The man, realizing he had lost his grip, turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." As I backed away, I could feel the weight of their dark history pressing down on me. Lucy's eyes glinted with something sinister, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I turned and ran, the cafe door swinging closed behind me. As I sprinted into the night, I could still hear the echoes of their confrontation ringing in my ears. I had entered a world I didn't understand, and I realized that sometimes the person you think you know is just a mask hiding something far more terrifying. The darkness had swallowed me whole, and there was no turning back. It all started on a Friday night, the kind of night where the air feels thick with anticipation, and everyone's buzzing with that weekend energy. I had just moved to this small town, and being new here, I figured I'd give the whole dating scene a shot. I downloaded this app called Hinge that everyone raved about. You know, the one that claims to be designed to be deleted? I thought, why not? A little distraction from unpacking can't hurt. Scrolling through profiles felt like a mixed bag of awkward selfies, over-the-top bios, and some genuinely interesting people. Then I stumbled upon his profile. Jake, he had this mysterious vibe, the kind that draws you in like a moth to a flame. His picture showed him hiking, a few candid shots with friends, and one where he was standing in front of an old, crumbling house that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. The caption read, "Looking for someone to explore the unknown with." I felt a chill run down my spine, but in a good way. It was intriguing. We matched almost instantly. The conversation flowed easily, as if we had known each other for years. He was charming, witty, and had this way of making the mundane feel exciting. But as we chatted late into the night, I noticed something odd. He seemed to know a bit too much about me for someone I had just met online. It creeped me out a little, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. After all, he was cute and seemed genuine enough. After a week of texting, we decided to meet up. He suggested a local cafe called The Grind, known for its rustic atmosphere and homemade pastries. The place had this cozy, nostalgic vibe, with dim lighting and mismatched furniture that felt like stepping back in time. I arrived first, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and I could see a few couples tucked away in corners, sharing intimate moments. When Jake walked in, my heart skipped a beat. He looked even better in person, with tousled hair and an easy smile that made my stomach flutter. We talked for hours, laughter bouncing off the walls, but there was something unsettling about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He had a way of shifting the conversation to dark topics, almost as if he enjoyed watching my reactions. I felt a thrill, but it was laced with an inexplicable dread. As the evening wore on, he suggested we go for a walk. The cafe was in a quaint part of town, with cobblestone streets and old brick buildings. As we strolled, he pointed out various landmarks, weaving tales that felt both fascinating and ominous. He brought up the abandoned house from his profile picture, saying it was rumored to be haunted. My heart raced. I felt drawn to it, but a voice in my head screamed to stay away. But curiosity won out. He suggested we check it out, and despite the knot in my stomach, I couldn't say no. The house loomed ahead, its cracked windows and sagging porch giving off a sinister vibe. It was more imposing up close. The air grew colder, and I could hear the wind howling through the trees, creating a soundtrack of unease. My phone buzzed with notifications, but I ignored them, too caught up in the moment. We stepped inside, and the world outside faded away. The interior greeted us with a musty scent and shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls. Dust motes danced in the dim light, filtering through the windows. Jake led the way, his excitement palpable, but I felt a sense of foreboding growing stronger. As we ventured deeper into the house, I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols that looked like they belonged in a forgotten language. Jake seemed entranced by them, his eyes gleaming as he explained their meanings, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. We reached the basement door, its hinges creaking ominously as Jake pushed it open. A steep staircase descended into darkness, and I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but Jake was already halfway down, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows. I followed, my heart pounding. When we reached the bottom, I could barely make out the outlines of old furniture and dusty boxes. A chill ran through the air, and the darkness felt almost alive. Jake pulled out his phone, using the flashlight to illuminate the space. That's when I saw it, a large, ornate mirror leaning against the wall. The glass was cracked, but in its reflection, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just Jake standing beside me. There was another figure behind him, a shadowy outline that looked distorted and wrong. I blinked, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, it was gone. "Did you see that?" I managed to whisper, my voice shaky. Jake turned, a curious expression on his face. "See what?" I hesitated, unsure of how to explain, but he seemed unfazed, almost eager to explore further. The tension in the air thickened, and the darkness pressed in around us. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but Jake was insistent. He reached for the mirror, tracing his fingers along the cracks as if it held some kind of secret. I stepped back, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. The room felt like it was closing in, and I could hear a faint whispering, like voices echoing off the walls. My heart raced as I realized I was not just afraid of the house, I was afraid of Jake. The way he was fixated on that mirror felt wrong, almost obsessive. My phone buzzed again, and this time I pulled it out, my hands shaking as I checked for messages. There were dozens of texts from my friends, worried about where I was. That's when I saw it, a message from Jake. "You're not leaving yet, are you?" My stomach dropped. I looked up, and he was staring at me, a smile creeping across his face that sent chills down my spine. I turned to make a run for it, but the staircase felt like it was miles away. The shadows in the basement seemed to stretch, coiling around my feet, as if trying to hold me in place. Jake's laughter echoed in my ears, a sound that felt both lighthearted and sinister. I pushed through the fear, sprinting toward the stairs, and I could hear him behind me, footsteps echoing like thunder. Just as I reached the top, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I spun around. But it wasn't Jake, it was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow. She raised a finger to her lips, urging silence, then pointed toward the basement. "Don't let him take you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My heart raced as I realized this was a warning, but before I could respond, she vanished into the shadows, leaving me breathless and terrified. I bolted outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking as I tried to unlock the door. The last thing I saw before I drove away was Jake standing at the door of the house, a look of anger etched across his face. Days went by, and I tried to shake off the experience as just a bad date, but the feeling lingered. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. It wasn't until a week later, scrolling through social media, that I saw a news article about that very house. Apparently, it had been the site of several disappearances over the years. The last occupant had vanished without a trace. But the twist hit me like a punch to the gut when I recognized the name of the last person reported missing. It was Jake. The picture accompanying the article was the same one from his Hinge profile, that charming smile, now haunting me from the screen. I felt sick. Had I narrowly escaped? Or was I just another name to add to the list? I had never been a big believer in online dating. I mean, who really puts their heart on the line through a screen? But after my last breakup, I found myself scrolling through the endless profiles on Hinge, hoping for a spark. It was late, the glow of my phone lighting up my small apartment like a warm beacon in an otherwise cold world. I was still wearing my pajamas, the same ones I had put on the night before, and I could almost hear the ice cream in the freezer calling my name. Then I saw her. Her profile picture was a little too perfect, with her wavy hair cascading over one shoulder and a smile that seemed to light up the night. She had this adventurous vibe, listing hiking, ghost tours, and escape rooms among her interests. My heart raced a little. There was something captivating about her. Her name was Lily, and she lived just a few streets over. We matched almost instantly, and our conversation flowed easily. Lily was funny and witty, and I found myself waiting eagerly for her messages. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing at all. I felt a connection that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Eventually, she suggested we meet up, and I was so thrilled that I nearly forgot to breathe. We decided to meet at an old coffee shop downtown, one of those places that had the charm of creaky floorboards and mismatched furniture. It was dimly lit, the kind of place that felt like a hidden gem. When I arrived, my heart was pounding. I scanned the room, anxiety creeping in. What if she was nothing like her pictures? What if she was a total weirdo? But then I saw her sitting at a corner table, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug, and everything else faded away. Lily was gorgeous, just like her photos, and I was instantly at ease. We talked, laughed, and shared stories until the sun began to dip below the horizon. The atmosphere shifted as the shadows grew longer, and the coffee shop felt cozier, more intimate. But there was something that flickered in her eyes, a glint that made my stomach twist in an odd way. After hours of laughter, she suggested we take a walk through a nearby park. I thought it was a great idea. The night was crisp and clear, and the moonlight filtered through the trees like a soft spotlight. We meandered down the path, chatting about our favorite horror movies and ghost stories. The park was mostly empty, a few other couples milling about, but it felt like we were in our own world. Then, out of nowhere, Lily stopped and looked at me, her expression shifting. There was a seriousness in her voice that caught me off guard. She talked about how she loved the thrill of fear, the way it made her feel alive. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was just a funny quirk, but as she spoke, I noticed the intensity in her gaze. It was almost fervent. As we walked deeper into the park, the air grew heavier, the shadows longer, and I could feel a chill creeping into my bones. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting and curling like skeletal fingers. I tried to shake off the unease. After all, we were just taking a stroll. But then she mentioned that she had a fascination with the paranormal, how she loved exploring abandoned places and seeking out haunted locations. She spoke about a haunted house that supposedly existed in the area, and my curiosity piqued. I was intrigued despite the shivers racing down my spine. She suggested we check it out. I hesitated, a mix of excitement and dread swirling inside me. The thought of wandering through a creepy old house at night was both thrilling and terrifying. But I didn't want to seem like a wimp, so I agreed. As we made our way to the address she pulled up on her phone, the darkness enveloped us like a thick fog. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the rustle of branches in the wind. The world around us felt alive in a way that sent goosebumps racing across my skin. Finally, we reached the dilapidated structure, a crumbling Victorian house that looked like something straight out of a horror film. Vines snaked up the sides, and broken windows stared down at us like empty eyes. My heart raced as we approached the front door, which hung ajar, creaking ominously as a gust of wind pushed it further open. Lily stepped inside without hesitation, her silhouette swallowed by the darkness. I followed, my instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I couldn't bring myself to leave her. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mold and decay. We explored the first floor, moving cautiously from room to room. Each creak of the floorboards sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I could feel Lily's excitement, her eyes gleaming as she pointed out old photographs and dusty furniture. I tried to match her energy, but an invisible weight pressed down on me. Then, she led me upstairs, the staircase groaning under our weight. The second floor was even darker, the moonlight barely illuminating the corridor ahead. As we stepped into the first bedroom, I was hit with a wave of cold air, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. There was something unsettling about this room, a heavy, oppressive feeling that settled in my chest. I glanced at Lily, but she seemed lost in her own world, her eyes scanning the walls, captivated. I turned back to the room and noticed something strange. One of the walls had an old, faded wallpaper that seemed to ripple slightly, like it was breathing. Suddenly, I felt it, an inexplicable sense of dread creeping in. I took a step back, my heart racing, but Lily was oblivious. She was too focused on the strange energy of the room, her excitement palpable. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. As I turned to suggest we leave, I heard a faint whisper, a voice that seemed to echo from the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to bolt, but as I glanced back at Lily, her expression had changed dramatically. Her playful demeanor had vanished, replaced by a chilling intensity that made my skin crawl. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto mine with a predatory gleam. I felt like prey caught in a trap, the air crackling with tension. I stumbled backward, my instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could make a move, she took a step toward me, a smile spreading across her face that felt all wrong. In that moment, everything fell into place. The way she had talked about fear, the intensity in her gaze, it all clicked. I realized she wasn't just fascinated by the paranormal. She craved it. She was drawn to the darkness in a way I couldn't comprehend. Just as I turned to flee, the wall behind me shifted, revealing a hidden door that swung open with a creak. I barely had time to process it before Lily stepped forward, her smile widening. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, and the realization hit me like a slap. I turned and ran, adrenaline propelling me down the stairs and out of that cursed house, the night air hitting me like a wave. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was safely back on the street, my heart pounding in my chest. As I caught my breath, I whipped out my phone, hands shaking as I blocked her number. The chill of the night clung to me, and I couldn't shake the feeling of her eyes watching me from the darkness, a reminder that some connections are better left unexplored. I thought online dating would lead me to love, but instead, I had stumbled into a nightmare. The shadows of that haunted house would haunt my dreams, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurks behind the allure of a perfect profile. The night was creeping in, and I was home alone, scrolling through my phone. My friends had been trying to convince me to get on Hinge for weeks. "You've got to meet new people," they said, but I'd always shrugged it off. That is until I finally caved, thinking maybe it was time to step out of my comfort zone. After all, what could go wrong with swiping through profiles from the comfort of my couch? It was a typical evening, the kind where shadows stretched eerily across the room, making the familiar feel foreign. I set up my profile, picking a few decent pictures and writing a bio that felt like a forced introduction to a group project. I was nervous, the kind of nervous that makes your palms sweat slightly. But soon enough, I had a match. His name was Jake, and he had this smile that lit up his entire face. We chatted for hours, the conversation flowing easily, like we were old friends reconnecting after years apart. As the days passed, we texted back and forth, exchanging stories about our lives. I was charmed by his wit and the way he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. It felt refreshing, a brief escape from my mundane routine. One evening, he suggested we meet up. I hesitated, my mind racing with all the horror stories I'd heard about online dating. But curiosity won. He was just a guy, right? Nothing could be that bad. We decided to meet at a cafe tucked away in a quiet part of town. The place had a cozy vibe, with dim lighting and the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest. I spotted him at the corner table, tapping away on his phone. He looked up when I approached, and that smile of his made my nerves settle, at least for a moment. The date went well, or at least I thought it did. We talked about everything from our favorite movies to our childhood adventures. I felt a connection, something that made me believe that maybe this was more than just a casual meeting. But there was something about him that felt slightly off, like a low hum in the background that I couldn't quite place. He spoke passionately, but I sometimes caught a flicker of something darker behind his eyes, a shadow that disappeared as quickly as it came. After the date, he walked me to my car. The night was chilly, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the cafe. As we stood by my car, I felt a thrill of anticipation. I thought maybe he'd lean in for a kiss, but he just smiled and waved goodbye, leaving me feeling slightly deflated. The next few days were a whirlwind of texts. He was charming and attentive, but the more I got to know him, the more that little voice in my head grew louder. I catch him saying odd things, like how he never really understood why people were afraid of the dark or how he found comfort in being alone. There was something about those comments that unsettled me, but I brushed it aside, convincing myself I was just overthinking things. One evening, he invited me to his apartment for a movie night. I hesitated. My gut was warning me, but I silenced it. I wanted to believe it was all in my head. His place was in an old building, the kind that creaked and groaned with every step. The moment I walked in, a chill ran down my spine. The walls were bare, save for a few scattered pictures, each showing him with friends who all seemed to fade into the background. It felt eerily empty, and I had to remind myself that it was just an apartment. We settled on the couch, and he chose a horror film, of course. As the movie played, I found myself jumping at every little sound. Jake laughed at my reactions, but there was something unsettling in his amusement. It was like he took pleasure in my fear. I tried to focus on the film, but my mind wandered. I noticed how the shadows danced across his face, twisting and turning in the dim light. Halfway through the movie, I excused myself to the bathroom. As I walked down the narrow hallway, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. The walls seemed to close in, and I hurried through the dark, feeling like I was being watched. When I returned to the living room, Jake was staring at the screen, but his expression had changed. It was as if he was in a trance, his eyes darting back and forth like he was catching glimpses of something I couldn't see. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lurked beneath the surface, gnawing at my mind. I suggested we change the movie, but he insisted we finish it. I complied, but my heart raced as the tension on screen escalated. The film's climax drew nearer, and I could feel the air grow heavier, thick with something unspoken. Suddenly, the power flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, using its light to navigate through the room. I called out for Jake, but my voice felt swallowed by the shadows. He didn't respond. Panic set in as I turned to find him, but all I could see were the outlines of the furniture, looming like spectral figures. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against the walls. My pulse quickened as I followed the sound, drawn deeper into the darkened apartment. The air felt electric, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I turned a corner, and there he was, standing in front of a closed door. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. I held my breath, my instinct screaming at me to run, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. He turned to me, and his smile was wide, almost predatory. I wanted to back away, but he reached for the doorknob and twisted it. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room filled with photographs, hundreds of them, all pinned to the walls. Each photo showed him with different women, all smiling, all looking happy. But there was a pattern. They all had one thing in common. Their eyes were vacant, as if they were mere shells of their former selves. My heart dropped as I realized they all had gone missing. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, the pieces falling into place. The eerie comments, the unsettling vibe, it all made sense now. I tried to escape, but Jake was there, blocking my path, his smile now twisted and sinister. I was trapped, and the shadows whispered secrets I never wanted to hear. Just as I braced myself for the worst, a loud crash echoed from the living room. Jake's expression shifted from glee to confusion. I seized the moment, darting past him and sprinting toward the front door. I burst outside, gasping for air as adrenaline surged through me. I could hear him calling after me, but I didn't look back. I ran until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys while my hands trembled. I could feel him close behind, and with a final burst of energy, I jumped into the driver's seat and locked the door just in time. I sped away, leaving the shadows of his apartment behind. My heart raced as I drove, and the weight of what I had just escaped settled over me like a heavy fog. I didn't stop until I was home, the familiarity of my space grounding me. But as I sat in my living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it, my breath hitching in my throat. It was a message from Jake. "I didn't mean to scare you. Just wanted to show you my collection. Let's meet again soon." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. I had thought I had escaped, but the truth was far more sinister. He knew where I lived. The shadows that had haunted me that night were far from gone. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that I was no longer just a girl who had swiped right. I had become part of his collection. I never thought I'd find myself scrolling through a dating app at 1 a.m., but there I was, bleary-eyed and swiping left and right like my life depended on it. It was one of those nights where sleep felt like a distant memory, and I was caught in the endless loop of scrolling through profiles, looking for a connection that seemed to elude me. Most of the faces looked familiar, just random guys posing with their fish or flexing in front of cars. Then, amidst the usual parade of wannabe athletes and weekend adventurers, I spotted him. His name was Mark, and his profile caught my attention immediately. There was something in his eyes, a glimmer of mischief mixed with a hint of mystery. He had a few pictures, a close-up shot of him smiling, another of him on a hiking trail, and one where he was holding a vintage camera. His bio was short but intriguing, looking for someone who can handle a little darkness. I hesitated but swiped right, half expecting nothing to come of it. To my surprise, we matched almost instantly. I felt a rush of excitement tinged with apprehension. Was I really ready to meet someone who might be as dark as he suggested? But curiosity got the better of me. We exchanged messages, and it didn't take long for him to suggest we meet up at a local cafe, a cozy little spot known for its dim lighting and eclectic vibe. The night of our date, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread as I made my way to the cafe. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and the streets were slick with a recent downpour. I arrived early, trying to calm my nerves by sipping on a steaming cup of coffee. The place was dimly lit, with shadows dancing on the walls, creating an atmosphere that felt both inviting and slightly unsettling. When Mark walked in, he looked even better in person. He wore a dark leather jacket, his hair tousled in a way that made him look effortlessly cool. We exchanged pleasantries, and I felt my heartbeat quicken as we talked about our interests, sharing stories about our lives. But there was something in his gaze that made me uneasy. It was like he was peeling back layers of my personality, examining my every thought and feeling. As the evening wore on, the conversation took a darker turn. He spoke about his fascination with horror movies, how he enjoyed the thrill of being scared, and how he believed that true horror lay within people, not just in the films we watched. I laughed nervously, unsure if he was joking or if there was a kernel of truth in his words. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he always found a way to bring it back to darkness. After a couple of hours, he suggested we take a walk to a nearby park. I hesitated, glancing at the clock, but something about his intensity drew me in. The night was still young, and I figured a stroll wouldn't hurt. The park was eerily quiet, illuminated by the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the trees. As we walked, the shadows seemed to grow deeper, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Mark pointed out various landmarks, telling me about the history of the area. But as he spoke, I felt a growing sense of unease. There was something about the way he described the park, as if it were a character in a horror story, filled with secrets and hidden dangers. I tried to laugh it off, but the more he spoke, the more I felt like we were stepping into a realm where reality blurred with nightmare. Then we reached a small clearing, where an old, dilapidated gazebo stood. It looked abandoned, overgrown with vines and shrouded in darkness. Mark's demeanor shifted. His eyes sparkled with a strange excitement. He suggested we explore it, and despite every instinct telling me to run, I found myself following him inside. Inside the gazebo, the air was thick with a musty scent, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The wooden floor creaked beneath our feet, and I could hear the rustle of leaves outside, almost like whispers. Mark leaned against the railing, his expression intense as he looked at me. He began to tell me a story about a couple who had disappeared in that very park years ago, their secrets buried in the shadows. I was captivated and terrified all at once. The way he spoke made it feel real, like I was sitting on the edge of a cliff, ready to plunge into the unknown. Just as I was about to ask him to stop, I heard a rustling noise coming from outside the gazebo. My heart raced as I turned to look, but all I saw was darkness. Mark seemed unfazed, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He leaned closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You know, sometimes the darkness can be a friend. It shows you the things you never knew you wanted." Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed from behind the gazebo, sending me stumbling back. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed his arm, urging him to leave. But he didn't move. Instead, he just stood there, watching me with an unsettling calm as the sounds grew louder. "Whatever's out there, it's just the darkness," he said, almost with a sense of reverence. "Embrace it." Now, I felt trapped, not just in the gazebo, but in this surreal nightmare that had spiraled out of control. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body felt frozen. I could hear footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. My breathing quickened, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Just then, a figure stepped into the clearing, a tall man dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by shadows. My heart dropped as I instinctively stepped back, pulling Mark with me. The stranger looked at us, his eyes piercing through the darkness. "Mark," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "you didn't tell me you'd have company." I looked at Mark, confusion flooding my mind. "You know him?" Mark smiled, a twisted grin that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, we go way back. He's part of my dark circle." The stranger took a step closer, and I felt a surge of fear. "You're in for a real treat tonight," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. Just as I was about to bolt, Mark grabbed my wrist, holding me in place. "Don't you see? This is what I was talking about. The thrill, the fear. You can't run from it." I could feel the panic rising to a fever pitch as I struggled against his grip. In that moment, everything crystallized. I wasn't just on a date. I was trapped in a nightmare crafted by a man who thrived on fear. But then, in a sudden twist of fate, the stranger turned to Mark, a look of surprise crossing his face. "Wait, you didn't tell me she was the one." "What do you mean?" Mark asked, his grip loosening as confusion replaced his earlier excitement. "That's the one they've been looking for. The girl from the missing persons case. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. The darkness that had felt so inviting moments ago now pressed in on us like a vice. I could see the realization dawning on Mark's face, his expression flickering between shock and anger. "I didn't know," he stammered, releasing my wrist as if I were a hot coal. As if waking from a trance, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I turned and bolted, running through the park, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Mark calling after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I burst out of the park and into the street, the world outside feeling surreal and bright compared to the darkness I'd just escaped. I didn't stop running until I was safely back in my apartment, locking the door behind me. Breathless and trembling, I leaned against the door, trying to process what had just happened. Mark had been right about one thing. The darkness had shown me something I never knew I wanted: freedom. But as I sat there, a chilling thought crept in. What if Mark wasn't finished with me yet? I was scrolling through my dating app one night, half-heartedly swiping left and right, the glow of my phone lighting up the dimly lit corner of my cramped apartment. My roommate was out, probably off on some late-night adventure with friends, leaving me to my thoughts and the dull hum of the fridge. I never expected to find anything real on a dating app, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the endless stream of mundane conversations that finally wore me down, or perhaps the bottle of cheap wine I had poured myself earlier. Either way, I was feeling adventurous. That's when I saw her profile. Her name was Clara, and everything about it drew me in. The photos captured her in various settings, each one more intriguing than the last. In one, she stood on a windswept cliff, hair flying in the salty breeze, and in another, she was cozied up with a book in a cafe, a soft smile on her lips. Her bio was short but compelling, looking for someone to share the weird and wonderful. I sent her a message, and to my surprise, she replied almost immediately. We chatted for hours, sharing stories and laughing over the absurdities of online dating. Clara was witty and insightful, her words painting vivid pictures in my mind. I felt an unusual connection, as if we were old friends catching up rather than strangers exchanging pleasantries. The more we talked, the more I wanted to meet her. After a few days of back-and-forth messages, we finally set a date for Saturday night. Clara suggested a small, tucked-away cafe in a part of town I'd never been to. I was excited, my heart racing with the thrill of anticipation. Saturday arrived, and the evening air was crisp, a slight chill brushing against my skin as I walked to the cafe. The streetlights flickered like stars, casting an ethereal glow on the cobblestone path. I arrived at the cafe, a quaint little place with ivy creeping up the brick walls. The inside was dimly lit, filled with the rich aroma of coffee and pastries, and the sound of soft jazz lingered in the air. I spotted Clara sitting at a corner table, her back to the wall, and my breath caught in my throat. She looked just as radiant as her photos, perhaps even more so. We spent hours lost in conversation, our laughter mingling with the music, the world outside fading away. But as the night wore on, I noticed something unsettling. Clara had an intensity about her, a depth that felt almost too profound for a first date. Her gaze was piercing, and her smile, while warm, had an edge that sent a slight tremor through me. As I left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Clara than she let on. The energy shifting around us felt almost tangible, as though we were on the precipice of something unspoken. We decided to take a stroll through the nearby park, the moonlight casting a silver hue over everything. Clara spoke about her love for the supernatural, recounting tales of ghost sightings and urban legends in the area. I laughed it off, but the way she described the stories made me uneasy. It was as if she believed every word with such conviction that it seeped into my skin. As we wandered deeper into the park, the ambience shifted. The trees loomed overhead, branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the night sky. The silence was thick, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Clara seemed to thrive in this atmosphere, her energy almost palpable. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the cool air. "Let's sit," she said, finding a secluded bench under a large oak. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I settled beside her, the weight of her presence pressing down on me. She turned to face me, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that made my heart race. She began to share her most profound belief, that some people were inherently connected to the spiritual realm, able to sense energies and spirits that others could not. I nodded, intrigued yet skeptical. Clara leaned closer, her voice lowering to a whisper as she spoke of a local legend, a tale of a young woman who had gone missing in the park years ago. They said her spirit lingered, searching for something lost. As she spoke, I felt an odd sensation, like a creeping dread settling in the pit of my stomach. The air grew colder, and a breeze rustled the leaves, almost as if the trees were listening. Clara's expression shifted, her gaze locked onto something behind me. I turned to look, but saw nothing. My heart raced, and I glanced back at her, an unspoken question hanging in the air. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and the atmosphere felt charged, electric. Just as I was about to respond, Clara jumped up, suddenly animated. "Let's go," she exclaimed, grabbing my hand and pulling me away from the bench. I followed, my mind racing with confusion and excitement. We wandered deeper into the darkened park, Clara leading the way, her laughter echoing in the stillness. But then the laughter stopped. Clara froze, her face paling as she stared into the darkness. I turned, my pulse quickening as I felt a shift in the air, an oppressive weight that seemed to press down on us. I strained my eyes, trying to see what had caught her attention, but the shadows swallowed everything whole. "Clara," I called, my voice trembling. She didn't respond, her body rigid as she remained fixated on something unseen. Panic surged through me, and I stepped closer, trying to shake her from whatever trance she was in. "Clara, let's go," I urged, but she remained silent, her breath shallow and quick. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, like a soft breeze, carrying distant words. My heart raced as I strained to listen, but I couldn't make out what it said. Suddenly, Clara turned to me, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to leave. Now," she said, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. We took off, sprinting back toward the park entrance, the shadows closing in around us. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to call out from the darkness. As we reached the streetlights, Clara stumbled, and I turned to help her up. But when I looked into her eyes, they were no longer filled with fear. Instead, they glimmered with something darker. A chilling smile spread across her face, one that chilled me to my core. "Thank you for the evening," she said, her voice low and almost melodic. The warmth I had felt earlier dissipated, replaced by an unsettling coldness. I backed away slowly, confusion and dread battling within me. "What are you talking about?" I managed to stammer, my heart pounding in my chest. Clara's smile widened, revealing something sharp and predatory behind it. "You've been such a good sport. I needed someone to help me, you see. The woman in the park, she's been waiting for a friend." I stumbled backward, the realization crashing down on me like a wave. I had been drawn into something I couldn't comprehend, something far darker than a simple date. The laughter, the connection, it had all been a facade, a lure to bring me into her world. In that moment, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, reaching out for me, and I turned to run, the night closing in around me. I didn't look back, but I could feel her eyes watching me, a chilling reminder that some connections are not meant to be made. I had always been a little skeptical about online dating, but when my friends convinced me to try Hinge, I figured, why not? It was one of those nights, rain pouring outside, a chill in the air, and I found myself curled up on the couch, scrolling through profiles. I swiped left on a few guys, then stumbled upon one that caught my eye. Jake. His bio was vague but intriguing, mentioning a love for horror movies and late-night ghost stories. His smile was charming, and I found myself grinning back at the screen, feeling a little giddy. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. Jake was funny, witty, and surprisingly insightful. I felt a connection that I hadn't experienced in a while. After a few days of texting, he asked me out to a local diner, and I agreed, excitement bubbling up inside me. The day of the date, I spent way too long picking out the perfect outfit, trying to shake off the anxiety that wrapped around my stomach like a tight coil. The diner was cozy, illuminated with soft, yellow lights and filled with the aroma of greasy fries and coffee. I arrived early, tapping my foot nervously and glancing at the door every time it opened. When Jake finally walked in, my heart raced. He was even better looking in person, with tousled hair and an easy smile. We talked over burgers and shakes, and I found myself laughing uncontrollably at his jokes. It felt like we were the only two people in the room. After dinner, he suggested a walk in the nearby park, and I agreed. It was a warm night despite the rain earlier, and the moon cast an eerie glow over the trees. As we strolled, Jake brought up his obsession with true crime and horror stories. I was hooked. We shared our favorite scary movies and urban legends. It felt thrilling, as if we were weaving our own horror narrative together. But then he suggested exploring a nearby abandoned house rumored to be haunted. I hesitated, the excitement mingling with a twinge of apprehension. It was late, and I didn't really know him. But that thrill-seeking side of me, the one that had watched too many horror flicks, pushed me to go along with it. We arrived at the house, a dilapidated structure with peeling paint and broken windows, looming like a specter in the night. The wind howled, sending a shiver down my spine as we stepped onto the creaky porch. Inside, the air was stale, and the floorboards groaned beneath our feet. The moonlight streamed through the cracks, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air. We explored room after room, Jake holding his phone's flashlight like a beacon. Every creak and rustle made my heart race, but I tried to play it cool, laughing off my fears. It felt exhilarating, diving into the unknown. As we ventured deeper into the house, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavier, filled with a sense of unease. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, as if someone, or something, was watching us. Jake, however, seemed unfazed. He shared ghost stories about the place, his voice dropping to a whisper, making my skin crawl with both fear and thrill. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash from the upper floor, echoing through the empty halls. My heart jumped into my throat. I suggested we leave, but Jake's curiosity got the better of him. He wanted to see what had caused the noise, and I reluctantly followed him up the staircase, the old wood creaking ominously under our weight. The second floor was darker, the moonlight barely piercing through the grimy windows. As we moved from room to room, I felt a growing sense of dread. I could feel Jake's excitement as he pushed ahead, but I was on high alert, scanning the shadows for anything out of the ordinary. Then, in one of the rooms, we found an old, dusty mirror leaning against the wall. Jake approached it, his reflection staring back, but something in the glass caught my eye. I stepped closer, squinting. There was a shadowy figure standing behind him, just out of focus. My blood ran cold. I blinked and it was gone. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to freak him out, but my heart pounded in my chest. He turned to me, a goofy grin plastered on his face, oblivious to my terror. "Isn't this place wild?" he said. I forced a smile, but the laughter felt hollow. I suggested we head back downstairs, but he insisted on checking out one last room at the end of the hallway. Against my better judgment, I followed him. The door creaked eerily as he pushed it open, revealing a darkened space filled with forgotten furniture draped in white sheets. He stepped inside, and I hesitated at the threshold, feeling a wave of nausea crash over me. Something was off. As I stood there, I heard a faint whisper, a low, chilling sound that sent chills down my spine. I called out, but my voice was barely a whisper. I could feel the air thickening, the atmosphere pressing down on me like a weight. Jake turned, his expression changing as he sensed my unease. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern flickering in his eyes. Just as I opened my mouth to answer, the whispering grew louder, swirling around us like a living thing. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and the sheets began to sway as if touched by unseen hands. Panic surged through me, and I shouted for Jake to leave. In that moment, the lights in the house flickered, plunging us into darkness. I grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door, but he hesitated. "Wait, did you hear that?" he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It sounds like someone is here." I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. I yanked him toward the stairs, but the moment we turned, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. My heart raced as I pounded on it, the sound echoing in the silence. Jake was frozen, his eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, a chilling laugh resonated from the shadows, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. The atmosphere shifted again, and I realized with horror that the house wasn't just old. It was alive, and it didn't want us to leave. Jake turned to me, panic filling his eyes. "We need to go now," he shouted. But as we rushed for the stairs, the whispers turned into screams, echoing in our ears. We stumbled, falling against the wall, and I felt a presence brush past me, cold and malevolent. We bolted for the door again, but it wouldn't budge. I screamed, desperation clawing at my throat, and Jake kicked it, but it held fast. Just then, the sheets in the room behind us billowed out as if something was pushing against them, and I felt the urge to run. Finally, with one last heave, I threw myself against the door, and it burst open. We tumbled out into the hallway, and I could feel the house's rage behind us. We raced down the stairs, dodging the shadows that seemed to reach for us. The front door was in sight, and I pushed Jake forward, urging him to keep moving. We burst through the door and stumbled onto the porch, gasping for air. The night was still, but the house loomed behind us, dark and silent. The adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned to look back, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. The reflection of Jake in the window, but he didn't look like the guy I had just been on a date with. His smile was gone, replaced by something sinister, something dark. The realization hit me like a cold wave. I hadn't just been on a date with a charming guy. Jake was part of this house, a puppet to its horror, drawing me in like prey to a trap. I turned and ran, not looking back. The laughter from the house echoed in my ears, but I didn't care. I was free, or at least I thought I was. The chill of the night air hit me as I sprinted down the street, my heart racing, but I could still feel the weight of the house behind me. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling for my keys, the night swallowing the sounds of my frantic breaths. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there he was again, standing on the porch, watching me leave with that same sinister smile. The horror of it all settled in my chest, a knot of fear that wouldn't let go. I escaped the house, but I knew deep down that I hadn't escaped him. I could still feel his presence lurking, a reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones that lurk in the dark, but the ones that charm their way into your life.